found a really actually impressive image sensor, and we've been able to optimize standby power a bit further each generation. And then one other thing that's new that we've been doing on Linux specifically is
today, we have a rather different video for you. I sat down with Nirav, the CEO and founder of Framework. If you are unaware of Framework, they are a new laptop manufacturer that burst onto the scene around 3 years ago. Their primary point of differentiation is that their laptops are completely upgradable. No need to stress about which configuration to buy. And their secondary point of differentiation is that their laptops have extensive Linux support. But what I find truly special is Nirav and his team's product-first approach. Unlike other manufacturers who are chasing trends that we just don't really care about when buying a laptop like AI, his team is instead focused on making the improvements that we actually want and then letting the product sell itself. And with that said, here is my chat with Nirav. Give us an overview of what the company is, what your mission is, just quickly so the audience knows what's going on here.
Yeah, sure. We're really hitting the reset button on consumer electronics. We've entered a mode over the course of decades, really, where the default was essentially products that were long-lasting, products that were repairable, products that in often cases were quite modular and customizable. If we think about the history of computing, really, and over the course of decades, reached a place where we have these very closed, sealed up, locked down devices, and that's become the default. It's become the norm. But we know that that doesn't actually fit what people want out of their products. And so Framework really is the idea that we actually can hit that reset button and point the industry in a direction that is actually just more respectful to people's rights and to the environment as well. And we've done that by actually just designing high performance, competitive products that last longer by making them repairable, upgradable, and customizable. So once you have that product, it's not just in the form that you bought it in, you can make it whatever it needs to be as your needs change over time.
Yeah, and I think, funnily enough, we've just finished recording our best laptop for student guide for 2024. And our last one last year was our biggest video of the year, 900,000 views. And, one thing that I noticed when I talked about buying a laptop that lasts the distance of your 4-year university and the importance of perhaps getting an extended warranty, I was thinking of doing a voiceover and saying, well, actually, if you buy a Framework laptop, it's one of the only laptops that doesn't matter as much because you can just change the individual components, right? If the screen breaks, you can change the screen. But of course, your screens don't break, but you get the picture,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
I have some obviously some questions for you. I think the first one is you've got the new Core Ultra version of the Framework 13, which I'm on here, coming out. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what's going on with that? And I know there's many other things that you spoke about in your own video of the Framework laptop, better cooling. I've got some notes here, got the fast refresh rate display. Why don't you tell us about what is new for Framework this year?
Yeah, sure. So like endpoint, I've actually got a Intel Core Ultra Series 1 Framework Laptop 13 right in front of me in the DIY configuration. So just opened up already, ready to go. And really fundamentally, the idea behind this is that this is our fourth iteration on an Intel powered Framework Laptop 13. We started with 11th gen. We've done, 2 other generations. This is the 4th generation. And so really every time we build one of these, we start by looking at the feedback on the previous generations, the very obvious thing to do. But as you noted, we don't just do it in the form of like checking out press reviews, which obviously we value and find really important. We actually go and dig into the community, see what people are talking about, see what people are interested in, and even in many cases, see like modifications that people have made to their own laptops to figure out like, oh yeah, actually this is, something that makes sense, something that's interesting. And we use that to inform then the product plans for each of these refreshes. And so for this generation of Intel Core Ultra Series 1, we did do a few things. Of course, one was just moving to that new generation of processor, basically like clockwork, continue to do that. Another bit of feedback we've gotten really consistently since the original 11th gen is for Linux users, where obviously we're getting a lot of traction, a lot of interest. The one thing that every Linux user asked us to change was the display resolution.
Yeah.
There are a number of distros and desktop environments where using fractional scaling works and you can like make the resolution work for you, but there are a number that just don't work perfectly or applications that don't work. And so we took that seriously. Obviously, it was a quite extensive development process to get there, but we did introduce a new 2880 by 18 or by 1920 resolution panel, which allows you to use 2-to-1 scaling, which is great for Linux. It's also just a great display with 120 hertz refresh rate. We have gotten feedback around the camera in the past that, we did at the time in 2021 have a better than average camera. I think competitors have kind of caught up and the kind of baseline for what we all want out of camera quality has moved, which is great. We're all on camera as often. And so we decided, let's go and see if we can build a better webcam. And so we went and fished around the supply base, found a really actually impressive image sensor and built a new second generation camera around it. And then just some general quality of life refinements. So improving the thermal system, continuing, of course, to develop our firmware and software stack to be excellent for Linux from a stability standpoint. And then we've done a couple of new things around expansion cards, like SD expansion cards been a long-standing ask. So we went and developed one of those. And then just actually kind of for fun, we decided to go deeper on color customization, this idea of like really being able to personalize your own laptop. And so we've added these 4 new colors of USB-C expansion cards as well.
And just on that, I'm a user that would appreciate having a full-sized SD card reader. What speed is your SD card reader? Because we've noticed a lot of the laptops are putting in SD card readers, but they're quite slow.
Right.
What speed did you choose to go with?
Yes, went all the way to UHS-2. So it's an SD 4.0 reader. We actually did look at SD Express. We looked at some of the other new standards, and we just surveyed the landscape and found that there just wasn't that much install of SD Express. And we actually would have needed to choose. There aren't basically receptacles and controllers that can support both simultaneously. And so we looked at it and saw like, okay, actually there are quite a number of cameras that are using UHS-2. Let's actually focus on that and target what's already in the install base. And so that's
yeah. And I thought it was interesting in your own video when you talked about the new webcam and you talked about, the pixel binning, that funnily enough, we've got these super high resolution webcams, but realistically, even the software we're using right now, 1920, 1280, 1200, so that's really, 1920 by 1080 is really the limit of what the actual webcam software is supporting. So it's really about getting the best quality image at that resolution. And I thought that was interesting too about your approach to that as well. Do you want to just tell the viewers quickly what you guys are doing?
Yeah. I mean, the idea there just goes back to this like pragmatic approach of let's think about how people are actually using the products, not even just on day one, but across the lifetime of their use of that laptop, and make sure it reflects their actual needs. And so rather than playing like a numbers game where we go and put in, let's say, a 5 megapixel image sensor and try to use it at 5 megapixels, it just doesn't make sense. It's actually worse to use a 5 megapixel sensor than a 1080p sensor the same size, because then you're interpolating from that 5 megapixel with smaller, potentially noisier pixels down to this 1080p image, rather than having a 1080p image sensor with bigger pixels. Yeah. And so instead of going 5 megapixels like we've seen a lot of other notebook makers do, we looked at what's the biggest physical image sensor that we can fit within this webcam format that we've defined, this little module that we baked in starting from that first generation. And we found this, I guess it's 1/5.7 inch image sensor. So similar in size to our first generation, but packing in all of the latest and greatest image sensor technology from Omnivision. So that pixel binning that you mentioned. So it is actually, technically, it is a 9.2 megapixel sensor, but because of that pixel binning, we can operate it in a 1080p mode where we're gathering a lot more light in these bigger quad pixels, much like modern smartphones do.
Gotcha.
And of course, because it is a modern sensor, it's got backside illumination, it's got like great pixel isolation. It's just like a really excellent sensor. And it's really basically the best sensor that we could fit into this notebook form factor.
One thing that I thought was surprising is you guys were pretty much first out of the gate with AMD Zen 4 U series, and you guys did a really, really good job of that. I thought, I've got one of those laptops, that's what I'm using right now. With the Core Ultra, I'm a little bit surprised that you guys are coming to the party a bit late in the cycle, right? Because obviously Core Ultra was out probably late November, December last year, I think was when it started to come out. Why did you choose to go to Core Ultra versus perhaps even skip it and just go straight to Lunar Lake when it comes out, or even just Zen 5, which is launching probably soon after we conduct this interview? So that was something that surprised me, because you guys were you were fast with AMD Zen 4.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, actually. And this is why I really always enjoy our discussions, because you always dig into like the why behind things in a way that I think a lot of other folks do not. And so this branches in a bunch of directions. One very interesting thing that I was looking back at, AMD 7040 series, their Zen 4 mobile processors that they announced last year. As you noted, we actually were quite early on it. The interesting thing there is that we actually did not intend to be early on it. And I think what happened is that For whatever reason, even though it's actually a really excellent processor, I think other OEMs were hesitant, maybe because of this kind of post pandemic laptop hangover where the industry was kind of in a lull, volumes weren't great. I think a lot of brands basically just held off on their product roadmaps a bit. Whereas for us, we stayed full steam ahead on let's actually just build the best product. And so we ended up being one of the first to market with AMD Ryzen 7040 series when actually we were several months beyond the kind of technical time to market date for that platform. And so as we look at our general philosophy around platform intercepts, we actually try not to be in the first wave. Based on our scale and our size as a company, the size of our engineering team, we can't afford to be in the first wave. Basically, it requires just substantially more engineering effort because we're the ones testing those platforms and finding bugs and finding issues, and obviously working with the platform owner like an AMD or an Intel to solve those issues. And they're always very supportive, but it does require a lot more lift from our engineering team and also from our manufacturing partners' engineering team. So philosophically, we actually do try to aim to be in that second wave of products, usually falling about a quarter behind the leads when it comes to time to market. And so for AMD, obviously, we ended up getting there almost first for both the 13 and the 16 for some of the parts that we used there. For Intel Core Ultra Series 1, we are kind of landing in that space where we would like to land, which is about a quarter after some of the earliest products to market, which means that it's a stable platform, it's mature, the drivers, the BIOS, it's all very mature. And also, of course, another factor here, going back to us being a startup, is that we are a small team. And so we have to basically focus and operate sequentially in many cases. And so this Intel Core Ultra Series 1 Framework Laptop 13 refresh, we actually kicked off the program internally and with our supplier after we were confident in the stability in market for that AMD 7040 series. So it's basically that serial process of, we started shipping that product in early fall last year, which gave us the start date for starting this platform.
Yeah. No, and look, I think it's certainly a good platform, Intel Core Ultra. We found, according to our own tests, for very similar power envelope, and you correct me if you're seeing something different, that you're getting really an Intel H series kind of performance from the 13th gen, but you're getting it at a much lower power envelope, is what we found. And obviously, you've got significantly improved integrated graphics was the
That's
other
right.
big thing that we found. Very significant. And certainly at the time we're making the video, the best integrated graphics that are out there. What about Zen 5? What are your thoughts on Zen 5?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to share anything on product roadmap, but we're going to keep the same philosophy of responding to what our customers are interested in, what we think makes for a really great product that serves their needs. Obviously, we launched that Ryzen 7040 series. We decided not to do Ryzen 8040 series because it was just too similar. It didn't make sense to basically spend that amount of opportunity cost on building a product on that product versus other things we could be developing. And so obviously in the future, you'll see what we believe is the most responsive product to our customers' needs as we continue to go forward.
Yeah, I think that, and I mentioned about your product management approach before, and myself coming from a deep technical product management background, that I like that there are resources required to upgrade this laptop to Ryzen 8000, right? And you guys clearly saw that it's basically the same thing as 7000 realistically, right? Very, very little difference. And I think that's the right approach to use, your team obviously for more impactful updates than spending cycles on that. And also I think that's also the fundamental, which I think, and when I say fundamental, I'm talking about marketing side, that it is a little misleading what they did, and numerous YouTube channels have called out, and I don't expect you to respond because obviously you're partnering with AMD, but, basically relabeling Zen 4 CPUs as something newer when they really aren't. And, that's been called out by numerous channels. But I think it was good that when we look at this AI marketing that we're seeing a lot of right now, that you are pretty much one of the only manufacturers that have no mention of AI. And I think it also shows a deeper understanding of the actual technology behind this, that let's call a spade a spade. You're not going to be doing big learning models on these laptops. You're just not. You don't have, even with these tops of some of these latest processors, you just don't have the performance, nor do you have certainly the data to do those kind of learning models that you would expect. And I think it's good that you guys, whether it is in choosing to avoid Ryzen 8000 or the AI marketing, you're not pushing onto consumers something that is there realistically to sell more product versus actually what's going to be beneficial to them, and you're focusing on, real things that are going to matter. On that note, as I did my updated research for, obviously we've used Framework for quite some time from the very beginning one, but I wanted to just take a broad look at what's going on in the industry from some of the buyers, should I say. There's a couple of things that I have questions on. First one, how did you get away with not putting in a CoPilot Plus key? Or a CoPilot key, should I say, because that's been one of the biggest feedbacks I've had, whether from my own team, this is annoying that this key is here, or from, viewers of these new laptops.
Yeah, obviously I have to be a bit careful here because I don't know what Microsoft has publicly positioned versus privately positioned. But as far as we know, there's no requirement for us to ship that key. We, again, go back to okay, what's the real use cases that people are using? What do people actually want out of their laptops? And we didn't think adding a key on the keyboard was going to be the thing that people wanted out of us. We're focusing our energy and efforts elsewhere. And like you said, a lot of this is that this is a hype cycle. We're in a massive hype cycle. It's AI everything. And I think for a lot of companies, they're hanging on to that as this new lifeline for an industry that was, quite slow and quite brutal to operate in, that they're hanging on to. AI is the thing that's going to, save the PC market, or going to, drive sales, drive revenue, or enable us to reinvent our brand. And as I think about Framework and what we stand for and what we actually value and we're trying to do with our products, we don't need a hype cycle lifeline. We need to build solid, reliable, long-lasting products that solve people's needs. And so when solving people's needs means delivering on AI acceleration or giving them shortcuts like even a physical key to toggle AI modes or AI functionality, then yeah, we'll do it if it's responsive to what is actually valuable to people. But until it reaches that point, we don't feel the need to help basically drive that hype cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point, that we've also noticed that there's a lot of people who are just anything new. They're basically, at least from my interpretation, seem to be taking press releases, what the PR teams of the companies are saying, and pushing it out on the consumer. And I think when it gets down to it, just to call a spade, far more people are going to care about that Linux change you mentioned before in the display's resolution of not having to do fractional scaling. That's something that's of real benefit to someone who's actually going to buy one of these laptops. And when I look at the laptops, what I hear, at least from my viewers, is what they want is less fan noise, longer battery life. They don't want a laptop that's going to fall apart every couple of years. They want a laptop that in your, certainly you've delivered on that they can repair or upgrade themselves. They don't feel this stress of when I go to buy a MacBook, I am stressed. If I don't get that decision on how much memory to have in there, I'm stuck with it. I am done. That is for eternity. And so I think that those things matter a lot more, where it's, because I've got you here, I'll repeat them: the fan noise, the battery life, the heat you feel, how comfortable is the keyboard, how comfortable is the trackpad. Those are what really matters at the end of the day to the buyer. And yeah, so let's switch gears. I do have a couple of quick ones to run through. These are some issues that I saw out there, and I wanted to know if you guys had solved them already. Battery drain of the internal CMOS battery, particularly when sleeping. We did notice that one. I have it over here or somewhere behind us. We have your Cooler Master collaboration case that we did notice that battery drained, and it, we had to replace the battery before using it. Here, we've got it right here. The Cooler Master case, which we do like, by the way. It's a very cool concept. Has that one been solved yet?
So on our laptops, actually, we no longer populate a CMOS battery. We actually use the main battery as the RTC power source. And so actually we do still have that header there. So if someone wants to take out the main board, put it in a Cooler Master case, put it in a 3D printed case, that they can do that. And then, of course, in that scenario, if they want to preserve that clock over power cycles, or rather over removing power sources, then they can install that RTC battery. And so basically the scenario for RTC battery is that like the assumption is this for a Cooler Master case, that system is mostly going to be plugged in. And so that CMOS battery is remaining at full charge. And if it gets unplugged, it'll discharge over the course of, let's say, months on any of these modern platforms. And then, if it's been sitting in storage for a year and you plug it back in, then your RTC battery might have reset or your RTC clock might have reset and you'll have to recharge the thing.
Gotcha. So it's not an issue on the laptops is basically, I think what you're saying. Okay, next one. Battery drain due to not initiating sleep mode when on Linux. I've heard a couple of notes about that.
Yeah, so there's two parts to this. One actually really nice thing about Windows that Microsoft's put a lot of effort into working with, obviously, Intel and AMD, is enabling this S4 mode, the hibernate mode, which is basically storing the contents of your memory to disk, and then powering down the system effectively to shutdown level power. And when you power back on, you resume your session, pulling that data right back into RAM. It works really seamlessly. Obviously, when you wake back up from hibernate, it takes a little bit longer to wake, but the UX is actually quite excellent. The challenge, of course, in Linux is that is not the default mode in at least any distro that I'm aware of, but it is an option in many distros. And so we do see some community members deciding to follow like the additional steps in setup guides to configure a hibernation mode and have that same behavior. And so basically, after, let's say, 10% drain in standby, dropping into a hibernate mode automatically. So it is something that you can do. Actually, it's something that we've thought about potentially like making a bit more guided in our setup guides to encourage people to go down that path. To date, we haven't quite done that yet. And the other thing, of course, we have improved is just standby battery life. The 11th gen Intel Core system in standby, we had between 1.5% to 3% per hour drain, which was, we will own it, was quite high. We did some firmware optimizations and some expansion card changes to bring it down a bit over the life of 11th gen. And then each platform since then, 12th gen, 13th gen, Intel Core Ultra Series 1, AMD Ryzen 7040 series, we've been able to optimize standby power a bit further each generation.
That's good to hear.
So now with Intel Core Ultra Series 1 and with Ryzen 7040 series, we're actually close to about 0.5% per hour. And so you can, basically keep the laptop in standby for a week on end without needing to think about, is my system gonna drain out?
That's good to hear. And this is, look, quite frankly, this has always been a problem even with Windows laptops too, right? One rogue driver, all of a sudden the laptop can't go to sleep, and you pull it out of your bag, it's hot, it's loud, and the battery's half drained or mostly drained. So yeah, I get that, and there's some complexities about it. I think that's just one that we've seen in general with, let's call them PC laptops, being Intel, AMD. I won't put Qualcomm in that bucket yet, versus the Mac that we've seen. There's still a bit of a delta and some room to move. Palm rejection on Linux. Any thoughts on how's that going?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I do think the behavior is similar to Windows, actually. So I think if you're having a hard time on Linux with palm rejection, I don't know if Windows is going to be any better, unfortunately. That is, I think, obviously a hard problem to solve, but I think in general, it's not one, I wouldn't say it's like in the top 10 complaints that we've gotten out on things that we want to improve.
Because I had a great next question for you on that one, by the way. I was going to ask if there's going to be a trackpad module that includes the Trackpoint, even though I certainly don't think a trackpad point is needed, but I understand where people are coming from.
Yeah, actually on that. So that I would say that is in the top 10 requests that we get.
Oh, really? Okay.
We obviously can't share anything on roadmap. It is a hard problem to solve, but we do hear the community. We do know that it's actually quite high in the list of requests that people have of us.
Okay. Speakers. This has been one that I know you had a new generation of speakers that came out that was a couple of decibels louder than the first. But I think when I think about the package, speakers has been one where I found Framework hasn't done as well as some of the comparable laptops. How are you going with speakers? And just to be fair on you, a lot of PC manufacturers, it is rare to find good speakers in a laptop, right? How are you guys going with solving that problem?
Yeah, sure. And you can see in Framework Laptop 16, like architecture and from design perspective, we did invest pretty heavily in speakers. We've got quad speaker system there. We've got an external smart amp in addition to the codecs built-in amp to drive those quad speakers with basically a lot more total power. One thing that we did do on Intel Core Ultra Series 1 is that we moved to a new audio codec that's more similar to the one that we have in the Ryzen 7040 series. So basically for Intel 11th gen, 12th gen, 13th gen, we've been using this tempo codec. There's actually kind of a hangover from the massive chip shortages that we had in 2020, 2021, when we had to drop off of the original codec that we had when we launched and switch over to this tempo codec that was a bit more basic in its capabilities. And so with this generation, we've been able to move back into basically a more feature-packed codec that has smart functionality, things like a speaker excursion detection or overheat detection, basically being able to drive more power without damaging the speaker. And so that does improve the overall quality of the speaker. It improves the overall loudness, basically just to bring it to around where that 7040 series Framework Laptop 13 is. And then one other thing that's new that we've been doing on Linux specifically is we're adding support on the Linux side, actually, and on Windows for using the Intel DSPs that are built into the CPU. And that actually helps more on the side of power optimization and like a little bit of extra functionality, but more so on power optimization to be able to run that, the EQ and some of that smart functionality at high efficiency.
Okay. And then I think dovetails nicely actually into my next question. Qualcomm, are we thinking of a Snapdragon laptop? Are we going to see a framework laptop with an X Elite or an X Plus processor?
Sure. And this goes into not talking about future product plans. But I will also say that's another thing that is in that top 10 list of requests we've gotten, really since the announcements of that platform and some of the products that have been coming out. Obviously, as we've seen the reviews and we've seen your analysis of that platform, we know that there have been some really great things that Qualcomm's achieved. There's some things that still need some time to get there. But that is obviously something that we're watching closely as we go.
On that note, I think what would be interesting to me is, given that, AMD Zen 5 is here pretty much now, we're testing it as we speak with their embargo out in a couple of days after we speak. I mean, obviously this interview might come out on the channel afterwards, but that is what it is. We've got, Raptor Lake coming out, not Raptor Lake, we've got Lunar Lake coming out afterwards, all of these lakes. I'm very interested to see how they perform, particularly at low wattage, to see how they compare with Qualcomm. Because one thing that we've noticed with Qualcomm as we test them, and we've got another video coming out where we've tested literally, we went out and got all of them. And for some of them, we've got multiple different versions. And what we've noticed is a very, very sharp curve in terms of their efficiency. They do very well at low power draw, but boy, do they drop off very quickly once you start feeding them more power. So I think it's very interesting. I'm very interested to see how these new processors from AMD and Intel go. And then, hey, well, is it worth really dealing with some of the software instabilities of Qualcomm? And it's not their fault, right? That Windows on ARM just in general is fairly underdeveloped, right? Versus going to one of these other platforms. So it's a very interesting time this year, I think, in the laptop space.
That's what I would say as well. This is probably the most interesting year from a CPU perspective in many, many years. And I think maybe in a year from now, we can chat again and do a little bit of a retrospective when I can share more about stuff I can't share now.
Yeah, certainly. I can tell you, if you manage to get a fully working version of Linux on one of these Qualcomm processors for framework, boy, that would be popular. We get a lot of requests for Linux on one of these Qualcomm ones. Just in general, are there any other new devices that you're considering, like whether it is a phone or, all of these, obviously these come with their own issues in terms of how to make them upgradable, or are you feeling pretty happy with being in the laptop space right now in terms of that's where the focus is?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. We're not done in the laptop space. Obviously, there's still broad swaths of categories that we're just not touching today with the two products we have in market. There is still space where we see opportunity to bring in longer lasting, repairable, upgradable products. We know there's demand for it. We get requests for it all the time. But obviously, we don't want to be a laptop company. We're not a laptop company. Laptops are the most important categories that we felt to start with to drive our mission forward, to build these great products and get them out to our customers and solve their real needs. But we see the same problems repeating themselves really almost every category. And so then it goes back to this question of like, for us as a startup, what do we want to focus on? What do we want to prioritize? And what's the sequence of products we want to chart our way through that's going to basically drive us to succeed in our mission?
Well, that's all I got. Thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll do another one of these chats in a year or so. And we can, as you said, look back on this crazy year of new product launches that we've had in 2024 for laptops.
Sounds great. Always great to chat with you, Josh.